Good evening, everybody. We're just letting everybody join the room. So we'll just be starting in a minute or two as people join us. I see 3 or 4 people already in. We're going to get started in just a minute or two. As you're all joining the room, I'm going to introduce our speakers for this evening, and I want to thank them for participating. We're going to try and do this in chronological order, but that we'll see how I do with that. Sheila Mehta is representing the LBJ Library, and she will be followed by Craig Ellefson from the Nixon Library, followed by Richard Weld from the Ford Library, and Josh Montanari from the Carter Library. And then after that, Chris Czar, who we heard from last week, National Archives in New York, is going to be the final speaker tonight. Just like last week, we'll be recording the presentation, and the presentation slides are also available. I see we already had a question, but it was just a thank you. Thank you, Eileen. I appreciate that. We're going to get things started with Sheila from the LBJ Library is going to kick us off. So Sheila, I'm going to turn it over to you, and thank everybody for being here, and hope you enjoy the presentations.
Great, wonderful. Well, in true Zoom fashion, we take a second and share my screen for you, as if we haven't been doing that for many a year now. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I am so excited to start off our time together looking at what the LBJ Library can do in helping to facilitate any inquiries about what to research for National History Day, or even the resources that the LBJ Library has to offer. Of course, the LBJ Library has a plethora of resources that I'm really looking forward to exploring with you. But got to introduce myself, even though you see me in the little Zoom square. But I am the education specialist at the LBJ Library, currently a party of one. So if you reach out to the education department, you'll be getting me, and I am happy to be of service to you and your students as you go through this really fun process of preparing for National History Day. As I was saying before, there are a lot of frontiers when it comes to the Johnson administration and the tumultuous 1960s. I want to talk about some of those frontiers thematically, as well as get into some of the details, and then I'll share some resources that we have at your fingertips to explore and research. We know that the Johnson administration often gets characterized for the civil rights era, as well as the conflict in Vietnam. And I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about those tonight. But I also would like to talk about more frontiers and these pathways of, innovation, newness, or just different takes on, people, places, and ideas that can be a frontier when we're looking at the 1960s. So laying them out, of course, we have civil rights. Not only do we have the civil rights movement, something that might be interesting for you, if you're a student, or your students to explore would be the White House sit-ins. That is an aspect of youth engagement and protests that we don't necessarily see all that commonly, even though we know the 1960s, the protest movements were often led by the youth. We have that not only with the anti-war movement, but we do see that with civil rights as well. We can talk about the March for Voting Rights in Selma. Always an interesting topic, something that kind of stays consistently in our recent memory with recent events and Supreme Court decisions. Of course, that does tie to the Voting Rights Act and just that differentiation between civil rights and voting rights, and that really important distinguishing factor between citizenship and then the right to actually practice that. Of course, we can extend that into Title IX. Sorry, my Nixon friends. I know we're starting to get into some of these applications and implications into the 1970s. But of course, when we talk about civil rights, it's not something that's happening very quickly. It is something that takes time. So a very traditional concept of a frontier is racial equality, but some interesting takes maybe on how research can be conducted. Another aspect that is unique to President Johnson would be his Great Society. Big aspects of that would be the war on poverty, the fair housing that comes with that, which can be a civil rights issue, it can be a poverty issue, the creation of the Housing and Urban Development Cabinet position is something really interesting on such a massive scale to have a cabinet position, which of course is something that we are familiar with today. But it says something very interesting about why that was a necessary creation in the 1960s. And, you know, about 20% of Americans in the 1960s were living in poverty. So this war on poverty, these housing issues, the creation of the Office of Economic Opportunity are all very important creations in helping to create this great society. Of course, civil rights is part of that. Voting rights is part of that. We're going to talk about education in a second. And there's a lot of very different facets to this. And so just some ideas to maybe spark further interest or even, you know, narrow in on an idea for your students. Of course, with Vietnam War, I like to look at that as just elements of power and how power is going to be seen, be viewed, and of course also be used by the president. We not only know that there was this semi-blank check written by the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, but then the reeling of it back in with the War Powers Act. Either of those are worthy of an exploration and research. Of course, the Vietnam War itself, which don't have enough time tonight to get into all the different aspects, even though that is kind of a continuation of containment for sure, as well as the Cold War. Other elements of power that your students might not think about, or honestly, a lot of people might not think about, would be the Six-Day War and United States kind of changing nature in the Middle East, which our friends at the Carter Library can also help to talk about with the Camp David Accord. So using multiple institutions for that research, again, not to steal your thunder, Carter Library, but just to show how we can work together, right? Of course, our probably a newer idea that a lot of folks wouldn't think about when it comes to international relations and power would be the United States getting involved, particularly during the Johnson administration, in South America and some of the issues with the riots in Panama. We're starting to see more and more issues, obviously, in Cuba, post-Cuban Missile Crisis with the rise of Fidel Castro. So there's some really interesting elements of exploration and plenty of information to research as well. Something that we love to talk about here at the LBJ Library would definitely be the final frontier, if I may, which is space. Johnson was a huge advocate for NASA as well as American dominance in the space race, both as a president and vice president before that, very influential. He would be the president who signs the International Nuclear Space Treaty, which is a fascinating topic of really predicting the future from the elements of reality in the 60s, the arms race, the space race, Cold War issues, and seeing that all come together with the International Space Treaty. And of course, we know students love researching space, so this is a great one for them to maybe take on. We also have the first spacewalk for the United States during Johnson's time in office. And so there's a lot of really fun and unique aspects of the space race that don't often get tied to the Johnson administration. A lot of that goes to the Kennedy administration as well as Nixon. But, you know, we like to promote Johnson right there in between and the efforts that he had made to support NASA and the space race. There are so many elements for people in society that we can talk about, whether we're talking about something officially like Immigration Act and how revolutionary that was to kind of overpower and change the 1923 immigration policies. We can look at more cultural and social aspects like Motown, looking at music as a frontier, what it was like not only for people of color to be creating music, but now being socially acceptable to listen to music created by people of color. We know the history behind that it wasn't always acceptable. A lot of people of color who created great pieces of music, they had to have, you know, somebody else record the music, and that's how it would be played. And so Motown and just this changing racial scene of music is fascinating. Some of our students might love to talk about the fashion of the 60s, and there's plenty to talk about with the fashion of the 60s. We have some on display here at the LBJ Library, and it is always just something else, right? Just something else, all the bright colors and the bell bottoms. Some other aspects that we see politically overlining with society and people, consumer safety, whether we're talking about seatbelts or medication safety, healthcare, the creation of Medicare and Medicaid, these new ideas of government responsibility as a frontier is a great idea for students to explore. They have some history with, Roosevelt and progressive era legislation, and we'll have some more modern research with, the late 90s and some of the, consumer protection safety movements that we see going on 80s into the 90s as well. And of course, bringing back Title IX as a gender equality issue. Looking at unrest, I like this as just a general theme of the 60s, not just the power aspect, but the unrest that comes with it. What we are familiar with is Vietnam, the anti-war movement, resistance to civil rights, particularly I brought up Freedom Summer and the incidents that's known as Mississippi Burning. Very, very fascinating, very sad to study, but also very interesting in how it was handled, what we knew, what we didn't know, and then what we found out from that, really diving into the missing students. The last three are aspects of the Johnson administration that I would like to bring to light. I'd love more people to be able to be knowledgeable about them. And these are often characterized as race riots. Don't tend to like to use that just because the word riot already puts some weight and some bias on there. But in the Watts neighborhood in Los Angeles, we have a race rebellion and an uprising that has to do with a police incident, but we also see it have to do with economic status and the change in the civil rights movement from racial equality into economic inequality. And so that's something really fascinating. We see that continue on into Detroit, those aspects of race as well as economic equality. And something that resonates quite strongly here in Texas, where we reside at the LBJ Library, is the Longoria affair about the rights of World War II veterans and not being able to utilize their full GI Bill, honestly, their Bill of Rights, but also how segregation plays into how we examine and honor our veterans. And that's what the Longoria affair goes into. So some really interesting frontiers to explore there. Education is something that's really important to us as well. Johnson would have loved to be known as the education president and has a lot of legislation that he can put behind that want, whether it's revolutionizing the education system, but also new creations like Head Start, creating ESL and hearing impaired education opportunities, making it more accessible for students to go to college, or bridging into culture, looking at how education can come to the masses through the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the creation of PBS and National Public Radio. So this new frontier of education and how education takes form is something that students might be interested in looking at. Plus, who doesn't like talking about Sesame Street? Right? I know we do. But that's a really interesting way, especially now when we do have digital, education, whether it's online classes, what's happened during the pandemic, seeing that change over time from the 60s to now is really quite interesting. With other aspects of the culture, just this idea of government funding of culture, hadn't seen a lot of that since the New Deal. And so now we have concerted efforts that still exist today. And then of course, some of those other cultural aspects that we talked about before with PBS and Motown. Conservation is a great frontier, something that hadn't been really addressed, mostly because of a tumultuous international landscape for the United States since World War I and World War II. So really the previous conservation efforts were under Theodore Roosevelt. Little things happen here and there, but not as concerted and as much of a focus as we saw with Theodore Roosevelt and then now with President Johnson. And so I've listed some topics there of aspects that students might be interested in, whether they're an animal lover or they're more traditional environmentalists with air, land, and water. We have a lot of those. And of course, the extension into how this affects our lives today. So we have a lot that we can look at here with the Frontiers taking on a more social aspect. I wanted to bring up two topics that might be of help with Frontiers and kind of moments in time that students might find interesting with the Kennedy assassination. Not that Kennedy was the first president to be assassinated. Unfortunately, we had a couple prior to this, but just this idea of this sudden change. While the Kennedy administration, like any administration, was, there were people who supported it and people who didn't. This national mourning that happened, and how Johnson, came to the presidency in a time of great crisis, and not necessarily a lot of support. Of course, there are the conspiracy theories. I have to talk about them because if I don't, other people will. And do they exist? Don't they exist? We have our take, we have the Warren Report, but it is something that tends to really pique students' interest. And so if they're looking at maybe trying to explore that, they can look at it as this moment in time, as a frontier, as well as the 1968 election and Johnson's decision not to run. Fascinating story, and that no one really knew what he was going to say in this speech, whether he was or was not going to run. There was two drafts. One that said he was run, one that said he wouldn't. And very few people actually knew what was going to be said when the cameras turned on and he started to give his speech. And so not only was there that shock and that moment, but also the kind of aftermath, because he did have a lot of support to continue running. So it's an interesting moment in time because it's not something that you see a lot of one-term presidents decide, is not to run. And so that is a unique frontier in its own right. Some names that your students might be interested in looking at in terms of frontiers and people. Lady Bird Johnson definitely deserves some top billing. An activist in her own right, not only a supporter of President Johnson, but an advocate for conservation, education, and just a very interesting story with her. John Lewis, Thurgood Marshall, Fannie Lou Hamer for civil rights, just a really great take on the roles that individuals can have. Audrey Faye Hendricks might not be a name that you're familiar with. She was the youngest person that was arrested during the Children's March. She was 10 years old, taken to jail. So that might be something that students would be interested in looking at, is this new frontier of not youth, but straight up child arrested in the efforts of attaining civil rights. Looking at other civil rights leaders, Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta, and the roles that they play, just because more exposure is fantastic and getting that word out there, since it is a civil rights fight that is still continuing. I put Joan Gaines Cooney on the list. She's actually the creator of Sesame Street. So if one of your students was interested in looking at PBS or particularly Sesame Street, she's got a really neat story that is fun to look at, but also just being a woman in television in the 60s and into the 70s and having this prominent role to change and shape education is quite fantastic. There's some great resources that you can find on her. The folks on your list right here, we don't necessarily have the resources at the library, but they do tie to the 60s. Everything else we talked about before, we have resources for at the library. Judge Sarah Hughes would be one of the federal judges, one of the few female federal judges at the time, and she would be the one to swear in President Johnson on Air Force One on that frightful day in November of 1963 when Kennedy was assassinated. And so kind of a very interesting role that she would never have gotten if it wasn't such a tragic circumstance. So hopefully that gives you an idea of all the different ways that the LBJ Library and the Johnson administration can address the frontiers that your students might look at. What I'd like to do is talk about some of the resources that we have to help research, whether it is LBJ focused or 1960s focused. I am making this slideshow available to Mark to be accessible to you and your students. So everything that I have and about to show you will be live linked in that PDF. So if you grab, in this case, we'll talk about our digital archive. If you click on the picture, it should take you to the link for Discover LBJ, which is our digital archive. If we have it digitized, it is available for you on Discover LBJ. And it really is just discoverlbj.org. So it is a pretty simple web address for you. It is easy to, we have a lot of results for anything you might put in there, but it's easy to filter through date, the type of of resource you're looking at, really whatever it is. We have a lot of great filters, but we do have a lot of documents, so sometimes that can be a little tenuous. If you're an educator and helping a student, you might want to help them with that, because one of the blessings of having so many resources is we have so many resources. One of the downsides is it can be hard to navigate through. But if it's at your disposal, we want you to have it. And if you can't find it, reach out, let us help you, because we want to make sure that you have what you need for research. Okay? And so it is just a simple search. I'll actually show you what one looks like in just a second. We also have a photo archive. If it was a White House photograph, we have it available to you. We have thousands of photographs, so it's available for all students, and we're happy to have it search in. You can put in dogs, you can put in head of state, you can put in picnic. I did that the other day, and have it available to you. You can see what's on the screen right now are actually childhood pictures of Johnson. We also have a YouTube channel, which not only has primary source video for your students, they can hear the speeches and see the rallies that Johnson was a part of, but also some of our more recent events that have been captured and digitally preserved. You can see some of the elements up there, from an evening with Doris Kearns Goodwin, which we had just a few weeks ago, to Women and Democracy. So if it's a relevant and recent event, maybe if your students are studying it, it's not necessarily specifically about LBJ, I would definitely encourage them to check out the LBJ Library YouTube channel. And it's easy to search, and you can see at the top here, there's a lot of different ways to look through that material. LBJtapes.org is a great resource for your students. We've taken a lot of the phone calls that folks are really interested in terms of research, and in conjunction with the Miller Center at the University of Virginia, we have them accessible to you with transcripts as well as some primary source documents. So you can click on LBJtapes.org. You can browse, you can see here, browse the conversations thematically. You can search for something more specifically, look at it through the timeline, or just simply use the search feature and it will pull up those. We do not have all of our phone calls on lbjtapes.org, but we do have the ones that are most used in an education and research setting. Again, if you can't find it, and you can't find it on Discover LBJ, which does have our phone calls, please let us know and we'll do our best to find that for you. But there's some absolute gems on lbjtapes.org. We also have a digital artifact collection that's accessible. So if your students were looking at objects, political cartoons, campaign information, we have a ton of information available at their fingertips, so they don't have to be in Austin, Texas to look at it. We're adding stuff daily. So if they're looking for something specifically and it's not there, it very well could be there in forthcoming weeks. So check back, check frequently, check often, and know that we are trying to get our museum and our artifacts digitally on your screen and at your fingertips. And so you can see just a few of the categories right there in the front, and everything is cross-labeled, so you should be able to find it if it's up and on our digital artifact museum. All right, so we have unique resources that we have. Our daily diaries, I know a lot of presidents have those. We also have Lady Bird's diary. This is actually a search from Discover LBJ that I can see at the top. I just put in daily diaries. And to show you how that pops up, we have Lady Bird's daily diary, almost 3,000 of them. The president's daily diary, we have almost 2,000. It brings up White House photo collection, brings up recording. So you can filter through, and this is all under the same search of daily diaries. Okay. We also will have oral histories in addition to the documents from a lot of his advisors and senior staff. And of course, if you go to our research page on the website, you have access to the archivists themselves. And if you go to the education page, you have access to me, and I'm happy to facilitate any collaboration with our archivists that you might need. So I took way too much time. I will stop sharing my screen. I will answer any questions you might have in our chat or in the Q&A in just a second. And thank you all for using the Johnson Library for your research, and let me know how I can help you.
Thank you, Sheila. I think we're going to go straight to Craig.
Yeah, let me get my video up here. Okay. Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name is Craig Ellison. I'm with the Richard Nixon Presidential Library Museum in Yorba Linda, California. Thank you, Sheila. That was fantastic. Hard act to follow, but I'm going to start with, hold on just a second here. Okay, here we go. I'm going to give you kind of a broader overview of who we are, what we are, where we are, and just to touch on one aspect of the National History Day topic of new frontiers, or frontiers in history. So first of all, we are the Richard Nixon Presidential Library, and we are located in Yorba Linda, California, sunny Southern California. We're about 30 miles south of downtown Los Angeles. And you can see a picture of us here. And if any of you participants are in Southern California, we invite you to come visit us. You can see the library that's down here. And on the grounds of the library, of course, is Richard Nixon's birthplace, as well as his gravesite about 50 feet away, and all accessible to the public. Again, broad overview of who we are, what we do, what we have. To give you an idea, we have about 46 million pages of textual records, 350,000 official White House photographs, 2 million feet of motion picture film, 4,000, little over 4,000 of off-the-air video recordings, almost 4,500 audio recordings of the president and the administration officials, 950 reels of White House tapes, 4,500 audio recordings. Going back to those 950 reels of White House tapes, yes, those tapes, if you're looking to do any kind of Watergate research. 35,000 artifacts, and approximately, we have approximately 1,200 researchers visit per year. At one time, we were probably the second busiest, I believe it was, before the pandemic, research room in the library system. So again, my name is Craig Ellison. I'm with the Education Department at the Richard Nixon Presidential Library, and we're going to talk a little bit about what I've just picked one particular topic, and that topic relating to National History Day's frontiers in history, people, places, and ideas. And I'd like to talk a little bit about Richard Nixon, and in addition to all these statements and all these things that were going on in the late 1960s and early 70s, one of the items at the very bottom here, the space program. Richard Nixon was inaugurated in 1969 at the height of the United States space program. It was in its Apollo phase by this time, and we remember that all of NASA's manned moon landings were during the Nixon administration. So in the early 1960s, President John F. Kennedy had made a pledge to, or a challenge to the country to put a man on the moon and bring him safely back to Earth. And by 1969, that's exactly what we did. So there were 6 manned moon landings under the NASA's Apollo program. We had Apollo 11, 12, 14, 15, 16, and 17, spanning from 1969 to 1972. Apollo 13 is not in there because they never made it to the moon, but they did make it back. One of the many interesting documents that we have within our archival collections, textual archival collections, and I've used this document many times with students at different times, is what we call the Sapphire Memo. And when Apollo 11 launched in July of 1969, it was designated to be the mission that would put Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong on the first humans on the moon. They didn't know exactly if it was going to go well or not. I mean, they had a pretty good idea. They had sent astronauts to orbit the moon a few times in previous Apollo missions, but this will be the first time that humans would be walking on the moon. So it was a very precarious mission, and they just didn't know how it was going to go. So going back to the Sapphire Memo, Mr. Sapphire was a primary Nixon speechwriter, and he had drafted a speech titled "In the Event of Moon Disaster." So this is in case things went wrong, and Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong were not able to get back off the surface of the moon, or if they crashed on the surface of the moon and mission failure, to say it lightly. I'll just read a couple of, I know it's hard to see here, so I'll just read a little bit from it, just to kind of give you an idea of almost like an alternate view of what we already know, and maybe not even thought about. But this was the read file that was on President Nixon's desk at the time of the moon landing, or in thereabouts, in case it had failed. It reads, fate has ordained, that the men who went to the moon to explore in peace will stay on the moon to rest in peace. These brave men, Neil Armstrong and Edwin Aldrin, know that there is no hope for their recovery. They also know that there is hope for mankind and their sacrifice. These two men are laying down their lives in mankind's most noble goal, the search for truth and understanding. They will be mourned by their families and friends. They will be mourned by their nation. They will be mourned by the people of the world. They will be mourned by Mother Earth that dared send two of her sons into the unknown. In their exploration, they stirred the people of the world to feel as one in their sacrifice. They bind more tightly the brotherhood of man. In ancient days, men looked at the stars and saw their heroes in the constellations. In modern times, we do much the same, but our heroes are epic men of flesh and blood. Others will follow and surely find their way home. Man's search will not be denied. But these men were the first, and they will remain the foremost in our hearts. For every human being who looks up at the moon in the night will come to know that there is some corner of another world that is forever mankind. So again, had to have a contingency speech just in case things went wrong. And again, I've used this document as an exercise in document analysis, of which there is a kind of a how to do so exercise through our Docs Teach, and we might be able to talk about that later on in the overall session. Another aspect of the space program, post-Apollo, it was President Nixon that had assigned NASA to a new space, or a new chapter in the space program, and it was the Space Shuttle. So these are the beginnings of the Space Shuttle, of which we all know and love, and has now since been retired. These next two documents, again, just snippets, just small snippets, kind of give you a flavor. The first document on the left here is the statement by the president, speech announcing to the world that he has initiated or has assigned this new program to being. And another aspect of this is, again, by William Sapphire, to the right, is what were they going to call it? You know, it wasn't called the Space Shuttle immediately. I mean, in a way it was, but they also had different ideas for different names, like the Space Clipper, the rocket ship #1, spaceship #1, the Yankee Clipper. Of course, none of these made it to the final straw, and it just remained the Space Shuttle, and that's how we know it today. Our archives department, probably with all the other libraries' archives department, has assembled what we call a resource subject guide. And I have this available. This is just the first page of a 18-page subject guide relating everything. We have textual documents, audiovisual document, or material relating to the space program and the Richard Nixon administration. It's available. I can hand that out. I can make that available. And if you have any questions on it whatsoever, I will be happy to address those and answer those as we go along. And I don't know if we are going to do it at an end of session question and answer session, but I may have to leave here in just a second. So I will be happy to answer any questions at this time regarding my presentation. Let's see, there's one chat here. Okay. If there are none, please feel free to contact us either at nixonlibrary.gov, nixonlibrary.gov research reference links that connects you directly to our reference and archives department, as well as Nixon reference, and the Nixon education at nora.gov as well, and that puts you in touch with me. Again, my name is Craig Ellefson. I'm at craig.ellefson at nora.gov, and I will be happy to help in any way I can with any projects that might be on the horizon. So my presentation was short and sweet, and I thank you very much for joining in. I'll turn it over to Richard now from the Ford Library. Thank you.
Good evening / afternoon, everyone. It's good to see you here tonight. Thanks for joining us. And thank you, Craig. That Sapphire memo always chokes me up. It's a heck of a document. I'm going to share my screen as well, just one moment. And what we're going to talk about is the Ford Library. And hopefully that is now showing up on your screen. 3, 2, 1. There we go. The Gerald R. Ford Presidential Library is actually in Ann Arbor, Michigan. The Ford Museum and Library have the interesting distinction of being the only set that has 2 locations. The library is in Ann Arbor at the University of Michigan campus, where Ford went to school, and the museum is in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which was Gerald Ford's hometown. So what I'm going to talk to you about tonight is some of the resources that we have and how you can access them. I will, of course, with the other folks, start out with some themes. I broke mine into foreign and domestic. So we have, for foreign relations at the time, the Cold War continues. But Gerald Ford was there for the tail end of the Helsinki Accords, which actually started under President Nixon. Then there were the Strategic Arms Limitations talks, or the SALT. Ford actually followed Nixon going to China, but he had gone previously when he was in the House of Representatives. The Vietnam War, continuing theme, of course, from the last couple of presidencies, actually ended during the Ford presidency. So there's a lot of documentation we have about that. And then after the war, and this is more of a social frontier, Operation Baby Lift was pulling refugees from Vietnam to America, which was a significant demographic change in several portions of America, including Grand Rapids, Michigan, where our museum is located. On the domestic front, I think some of the main topics that we can really serve you with are civil rights again, but especially the Equal Rights Amendment, which was coming to a head during the Ford presidency, and which Gerald Ford and Betty Ford were very big proponents of. Native American legislation, a lot of it happened during the Ford presidency. We have a lot of collection on that. If you have students who are starting with a frontier or Western movement, you might want to give them a longitudinal view by sending them over to our library and looking at some of the things we have to see what happened 100 years later. We have information about the Nixon pardon, and I told Craig I wouldn't harp on that one for too long, but that was a very big issue at the time. The swine flu immunization program was a medical frontier, and we have everything from information about how it was promoted to pictures of Jerry getting his shot. The 25th Amendment, if you want to tie back to the JFK assassination and the inauguration of LBJ, that led basically to the 25th Amendment, which is also how Gerald Ford wound up being president. And then, of course, the Ford presidency had the US bicentennial. So that's a pretty big deal with American history as well. And I could not resist the picture of Betty dancing with a student who's looking very nervous. So it was a short presidency, but it ties into a lot of other things that we've been talking about this evening. And no presidency is without a lot of events. Also, just to go back to the JFK assassination briefly, Gerald Ford served on the Warren Commission, so we have a lot of interesting papers that might tie to that if you have students researching. So how do you get a hold of this material? On our website at fordlibrarymuseum.gov, we have up on the upper left, you'll see where it says collections. If you go to collections and choose our digital collections, we have, of course, like all of the other presidential libraries, digitized paper upon paper upon paper. We have a Google search function for them, which you see here when you get to our digital collections page. It's pretty easy to do, but of course, Google searching is only so good. It gives you exactly what you ask for and nothing more. So if you want your students to really dive in, we have this sorted by Ford presidency or the pre and post presidency. So if you want to learn more about President Ford and Betty Ford, that's how you do that. But go to the Ford presidency, we have general stuff. We have foreign affairs and national security, and then we have domestic affairs and politics. I'm going to show you some examples of each of those last two, just to give you an idea of what's in the collection and what might be something your students could be interested in. Under foreign affairs and national security, you'll see that we have broken this down in a couple ways. We show people how we did the work for digitization by saying, these are the things we have digitized. These are the collections, the Kissinger papers, the memoranda of conversations, etc. But then we have them resorted again by exhibits and selected items. So if you have students who want to learn about Queen Elizabeth II's visit to the United States or visits to Mao's China, but then we also have some external sources which are related and might be useful for your students, because of course we understand people are researching, and A leads to B, leads to Q, leads to, oh, I have a whole new project now. So I'm going to take you here onto a discussion of the Vietnam War and make a point that you'll note these things started before the Ford presidency, because like most of the presidents, he had a career of public service before then in the House of Representatives. So Gerald Ford had connections to a lot of the topics that were key to his presidency well before he became president. And we would have those papers, and most of them are digitized for this kind of thing. So that's a good way to tell your students, don't just look at the president at the time this thing happened. Look before it happened, after it happened, and then look at the other presidents before and after it happened and see the connections. These things can lead students in all new and interesting directions. Going back to domestic affairs and politics, again, we have our systematic digitization column, then our exhibits and selected items, and then some selected external sources. And here, what I'm going to take you on to is women's rights, and specifically the ERA. And this is one of the ways in which Betty Ford really came to the fore during the Ford presidency, because she was a massive proponent of this and spoke out and spoke widely and did a lot of great work. So if you're looking into women's rights, this is a great place to look. And then I want to talk a little bit more about the Native American legislation. We have digitized a large number of Bradley Patterson files on Native Americans. And Bradley Patterson worked, again, with the Nixon presidency, as you see the overlaps. But a lot of the things came to a fore during the Ford presidency. And Bradley Patterson was an amazing note taker. So some of these individual links click to 60, 70 pages of files. So there's a lot of information here for anyone who's studying these issues. So I'm going to get us moving on next to Joshua. But if you have any questions, not everything is digitized yet. And of course, not everyone can come to Ann Arbor. So you can always reach out to our archivists at the library, or if you have any other issues, you can reach out to me directly. I'm going to pass these files on to Mark, so they'll be available to everyone who attended tonight and to those who see the recordings as well, probably. Joshua, you're up.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Richard. Let me just get my screen shared. Okay, it's so great to be with everybody tonight. I'm Josh Montanari from the Jimmy Carter Presidential Library and Museum. Might have some slides that I'll gloss over a little bit because I have like some National History Day tips and things like that built into my regular presentation, but let's see how much I can get through. To begin with, our library is located in Atlanta, Georgia. It opened October 1st, 1986, Jimmy Carter's birthday. He is still alive with us. He's 98, as is Rosalind, 95. There's 40 million pages of written materials in our collection, some of which you see in the image here, 40,000 museum objects, artifacts, 500,000 photographs, 2,500 hours of film, audio, and videotape. And that's a one-term president that we're talking about. If you are able to come and do research on site, we are doing it by appointment only. A little stretched a little thin on archival staff. We do require an advanced consultation before we confirm your appointment. You can submit and ask an archivist online form ahead of time if you have an inquiry or to set up the appointment, or you can call the library directly. A couple ways that you can do that, and you could be sitting at a table that Jimmy Carter sat at, like you see in this photograph, and he's doing research on his own administration. I think most of you will be in the boat of remote research, so we have plenty of that available on our website. Frequently requested topics and document sets already curated for you. To same case with education PowerPoints with primary sources and embedded hyperlinks. We have a Carter Library YouTube channel for AV sources. Our social media can be a lucrative source of primary sources, particularly our Instagram and Twitter. Our Facebook tends to be used mostly for events and announcements, but Instagram and Twitter is really good. We have National History Day resources on our website. We also have their National History Day resources we can go to. Docs Teach, I'll talk a little bit about that, although you might hear more about that from my colleague Christopher Czar, who manages that page. A lot of ways to engage our primary sources without coming all the way to Atlanta and sitting in some of the worst traffic on earth. But why we use these primary sources: consideration of original intent and context. I think they can reveal the intangible. They help us consider multiple perspectives. And I think a really important one is they prompt further inquiry. Just real quick, and when you're in this contest, if any students that are watching, please read the contest rule book. Frontwards and backwards, really understand the theme, use the resources that National History Day has on their websites, like the graphic organizer page you see on the right there. Really craft a strong thesis. I have a Carter example here. Choose a relevant broad topic like Article 2 of the Constitution. Think about primary sources. There's a lot of primary sources connected to Article 2. That's just one example. Narrow down to a topic that can be debated. That's an important one. We don't just want to put facts out there, create another secondary source. We want to, put forth, our own unique opinions. It should answer a how or why question about your topic or issue, and should keep it specific so that it's manageable. So here we can see Article 2 down to Camp David Accords. And then maybe the question you're answering is, why was peace between Egypt and Israel important to the United States during the Carter administration? And that could also be true of the Ford administration and the Nixon administration, because something I really love to talk about with the Carter administration was, in a few areas, it was the culmination of work from previous administrations that then continued to cooperate with each other to ensure their successors' success, as Jimmy Carter obtained with the Camp David Accords in 1979. Again, effective submissions, meet all the entry requirements, cite your primary sources accurately. I see it all the time where students find a primary source in a secondary source and they quote the secondary source. Quote the primary source. That's a big one. Make sure your content reflects effective use. Don't just be throwing things in to quote them. Again, don't want to just rehash secondary sources. You should have a unique perspective and should strongly support your thesis statement. Like, again, with that photograph, with your annotation, we wouldn't, I serve as a National History Day judge. It's not the greatest when we just see, I chose this because it shows, X, Y, and Z. You want to be a little more descriptive, show what the impact really is. When you see the example I have here, I chose this photograph because it's a powerful visual showing strong emotions these leaders felt ending more than 40 years of war between Egypt and Israel. So really get to the heart of what these sources are when you're annotating them in your bibliographies. Now, as far as Jimmy Carter for National History Day, he is the only president from Georgia. So if we have any folks from Georgia, it's a good point of pride for you. He had a very lucrative career in the Navy. He was in the nuclear propulsion vessel program under Admiral Rickover. He leads the first nuclear meltdown cleanup in Chalk River Laboratories in Canada in, I believe it's 1953. And he has, well, He's a state senator in Georgia, governor of Georgia, becomes president. He has an amazing post-presidency with the Carter Center that we share a campus with here in Georgia. Topics, I think, not just for Carter, but any of the presidents tonight. They're very flexible. There will always be relevant topics to whatever the contest theme is every year. So presidential libraries are really kind of a sure thing to go to when thinking about History Day topics. And so all kinds of sources available from the Carter Library, National Archives, in Carter's case, the Georgia Archives from his time in the state Senate and as governor. Frequently requested document sets. We have these under our research tab on our website. There's a lot of stuff on the Camp David Accords. 25 photographs after 25 years, 25 documents after 25 years. We have links to CIA declassified intelligence documents. Again, our hostage crisis in Iran, already curated document sets for you, same Panama Canal treaties. The president's daily diary, we have just about an entry for every day of the administration, I believe with the exception of the last 4 or 5 days in January of 1981, but there is something for every day, and that we see an example on the left hand side of the screen. So that can be used to support any of these Carter topics. Same to be said with the other presidents with their daily diaries. That can be something to cross-reference any topic that you're doing under those presidents. I have some of my education PowerPoints posted on our student programming page, and I think teacher resources page. Extraordinary Life of Jimmy Carter, Rosalind Carter, Energy Crisis. A big one, Jimmy Carter, Alaska and the Antiquities Act. So there was a law called the Alaska National Interest Lands Conservation Act, or ANILCA. Many hail it as the single most significant piece of conservation legislation in our nation's history. We have quite a bit on that. I have a slide presentation here, curated sources again. And one of my more recent programs, Women for a Change. Carter really boosts appointment of women, people of color in his administration, particularly in the judicial branch. I believe Carter appoints more female federal justices than all previous 38 presidents combined. That's worth looking into. Again, people of color in the administration, some notable ones. Louis Martin, again, this transcends multiple presidential administrations. He was known as the godfather of Black politics. He's the gentleman there in the center of the photograph. He was a journalist, political activist, a mentor to other Black leaders, and again, advisors to Kennedy, Johnson, and Carter. So there's a few presidents that you can find records concerning Mr. Martin. Patricia Roberts Harris, she's had served in multiple cabinet positions while she was in the Carter administration, appointed Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, also was the Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, and that was before the reorganization that creates the Department of Education in the federal government. And then also Andrew Young. I love this primary source right here from the National Archives catalog. We see the first African-American U.S. ambassador to the United Nations being sworn in by the first African-American Supreme Court justice, appointed by President Johnson. Again, a couple presidents here overlapping, but he had a notable career, executive director of Southern Christian Leadership Conference, congressman from Georgia. Afterwards, he's the mayor of Atlanta. Eventually, he's awarded the Medal of Freedom. Carter also passes the Refugee Act of 1980. This was, again, post-Vietnam. Also, we're starting to see a lot of activity from Cuba with refugees coming to the United States. So this raised the annual ceiling of refugees to 50,000. That number can be adjusted in response to emergencies. And a refugee was then defined as a person with a well-founded fear of prosecution. So that's in a frontier of redefining how our nation viewed and treated refugees. So I think that would be a commendable topic as well. We have a lot of primary sources on that. In a nutshell, Carter's diversity legacy. This was taken from Carter's own administration, summarizing what they felt their accomplishments were. The Record of Jimmy Carter is the title of that. We have a link to it in the slide here. But you can glance over that, see a lot of the things that he did on minority businesses, tripling of federal purchases, senior management, appointment of more Blacks, Hispanics, and women to the cabinet, sub-cabinet, White House, and other management positions. So a lot of different directions you could go with if you're looking at the diversity angle. And then again, post-presidency, Jimmy Carter was relatively young when he gets out of the White House. He was about he was more than, I think, around 20 years younger than our current president and the last president when he got out of office than they were when they got in office. He does establish the Carter Center with Rosalind. They have peace and health and election monitoring programs in over 80 countries around the world. Eradication of tropical diseases. The guinea worm is probably the most prominent health program they have. They are now going to be doing election monitoring in, I believe, 3 United States. Typically, they are doing them overseas. They are turning towards home now, in a bit of a pivot there. You can find information about Carter's diplomatic missions. These are some frontiers for a current or former president. North Korea and Cuba. He was the first president to meet with, or former president to meet with those leaders. And he does win a Nobel Peace Prize, is also awarded Medal of Freedom. He and Rosalind were awarded the Medal of Freedom by President Clinton. So again, we see a topic with presidents overlapping there. Again, our social media, here's just one example. Again, I mentioned that Anilka law. Here's a great artifact. We have a map that was autographed by all the prominent individuals who were involved in that law. And that was another one that transcended administrations. That's a really great one. Really, it begins with Eisenhower, goes all the way through Carter. There's something to be said for all presidents on that. Again, Facebook's typically announcements, events, but Twitter and Instagram, that's what we're seeing on the screen, have really engaged the public with primary sources and good content there as well. We always have a citation or a link to where you find that either in our catalog or the National Archives catalog. Again, our YouTube channel is great for video sources. Again, doing a little narrow advertisement, document analysis worksheets are really great for students to use during National History Day. Even if you just filled out the bottom section there, use it as historical evidence. That's basically your annotation for your bibliography, is what you respond to those. So these really are kind of like training wheels, I think, not just for students, but for all of us, to help us combat complacency and bias that we may or may not be aware of when we're doing research. So we have those for on the National Archives website. They also have them available in Spanish. Docs Teach, a great website. I use it all the time. Chris might say more about it. Not just primary sources, usually annotations, citations. There's also activities and lesson plans for teachers, and teachers can also publish their own. That's docsteach.org. So just to sum up, we are here for you at the Carter Library, whether you're able to come in person or work with us remotely. The library, the National Archives, websites, Docs Teach website gives you great, easy access to digital documents. The Carter website, the research tab, has extensive collections with their descriptions, so you know exactly what you want to have pulled for you when you come in for research. Again, there's document analysis worksheets, and we are available remotely. You can either submit an Ask an Archivist form. Under Education, there's a Ask an Education Specialist form. You can call the library, email me personally. Either way, always happy to work with students on National History Day, even if it's just a one-on-one deal. It's really near and dear to my heart. Always happy to do what I can for students and teachers. And then additional resources, kind of all the links I've already gone over, so I don't need to hash those out again. And so with that, I will stop sharing, and I believe we now go to Christopher Czar.
Okay, thank you, Josh. Thank you, everybody. I've been learning so much over the past hour or so. It's so amazing to see all the great resources that all of the presidential libraries have for National History Day and for other historical topics. My name is Christopher Czar. I'm the education specialist for the National Archives. I work out of our New York City office. And I was on here last week as well, giving a real focus within Docs Teach. I'll share a little bit more of that today. But if you want to find out even more, yeah, you can view the recording and get all the resources. I might as well just share this link right now if everyone can see that, from the Schumann Library, which will have the recording and eventually all the resources that we have shared today. Okay, so I'm going to share a little bit about DocsTeach again. So I think it's a really powerful resource, but I also want to give a sense of all different types of resources that the National Archives has. We've been hearing from the presidential libraries this week and last, which are part of the National Archives, but there are other offices, including our headquarters offices in the Washington, D.C. area. There are field site offices, like my New York City office, but also offices in Boston, Atlanta, Chicago, Fort Worth, all across the country that have records. And altogether, there are 15 billion pages of primary sources stored at the National Archives. DocsTeach is our main platform. It's our main online tool for teaching with primary source documents from the National Archives, and we try to include materials from all different locations, including the presidential libraries. We're not going to have every single document within it that you saw today. It's really more meant to be a little bit more of a curated sample of what is in our collection on a wide variety of different topics. But a lot of the documents that we did look at today are actually in it. And I was surprised that one wasn't. So I actually added it during this presentation, the Sapphire memo that Craig mentioned. Okay, so I'm going to briefly show this. There's a little bit more about this on last week's presentation, but DocsTeach is a place where you can find primary source documents from the National Archives, about 13,000 primary sources. And it's a place where you can search and find all these different types of materials. It's a pretty simple search. You can type in a particular search term, see what's available, and then filter your results by time period, by type of document to make that much more manageable. We have made, I did share this last week as well, a special National History Day page for DocsTeach, where we've made an extensive, though not exhaustive, list of different topics that touch on frontiers in history, everything from pioneers and Native Americans, homesteaders, different surveys and expeditions around the US to NASA space programs. And if you click on any of these, it does an automatic search within DocsTeach for that particular term. So you don't even have to know what search term to find. We've tagged all these documents to make it even more accessible. And you can look at things like patent records, think about frontiers and technology, and you'll see examples of these different patent records from our collection. If you click on any of these, you'll get the document itself. You can print it, you can download it. If you have an account, which I went into in the other presentation, you can add it to a folder. If you wanted to, if your students are still like in the exploratory phase of this, and you want to put together a small collection that they can really look into, you can do that as well. There's a short context, or if there's a transcript for the document, it'll be here as well. And then there is a citation for it, as part of the annotated bibliography, in addition to what Josh was sharing with how you are using it within your resource. If you want that full citation of where it's located in our collection, this provides that as well. There's also a link out here to the National Archives catalog, which might bring you to more materials. You can see here for this particular document, we included the image and one page of the description of barbed wire, the patent for it. But if you click on that link, it goes into the catalog, and there are 60 pages within this particular file. So there could be a lot more out there that you might want to include in your exhibit. If this was, you were looking at how the frontier in this case was tamed or changed, or how property was set up when people began moving west. There's additional historical contextual information here as well. And the really cool thing about the catalog is once you're kind of within this entry, you can see that this particular item is part of a series of patent case files. It's part of this record group, this larger collection of patent records. And if you click on any of these, you can go from that one individual item, or that one individual, in that case, probably file unit for the entire patent record, up into that entire series. And this series are patent records from the 1830s through the 1970s. They are all out in the National Archives at Kansas City. There's literally 100,000 cubic feet of records. Millions and millions of patents are filed here. And you can find out if you want to contact that office, see what's out there. If you have patent number, you're actually lucky because patents are kind of organized sequentially that way. But you can search within the series and then see, both this particular patent that we just saw, but then a bunch of other patents that are out there. And, if you typed in a toy, the word toy, or any word, you can see any other patents in that same series that might have a key phrase term that could be helpful. And this kind of makes doc sheets as kind of a way to go into the catalog without having to search the catalog, which could be overwhelming. Of course, the next thing I'm going to share with you is how to search the catalog, because doc sheets has about 12,000 or 13,000 primary sources. We just crossed the 200 million image mark in the National Archives catalog. And there are plans within just the next couple of years that the new version of the catalog, and you can see here that there is a beta version, will be able to handle over 500 million images. So there's a ton of materials. And for this type of project, maybe even more so than your day-to-day teaching of US history or US 1, US 2, government, etc. The catalog for History Day might be a very helpful resource for students to look into. It can be overwhelming, but essentially it does involve typing a search term. You'll see when you put in a result, you might get a very, very huge amount of materials. Here's 13,000 results for Apollo 11. But there are ways that you can narrow things down on the side here. There are ways, if you wanted to just see what's available online in the catalog, it brings it down from 13,000 to 11,000, slightly more manageable. You could filter by type of material. If you were interested in a moving image or a map or an artifact of some kind, I'll pick artifact. There's only 6 here and only showing 3 for whatever reason. So that's even more manageable. I'm going to get rid of that artifact. We'll go back up to the 11,000. You can find by file format, not super helpful in this case. What might be particularly helpful are these ones if you want to refine by location. For most of these things, you're probably going to see College Park, where a lot of these records are, but also a lot of these presidential libraries as well. Some of the field site offices too, though I'm not 100% sure what would be at the Philadelphia office. Fort Worth makes a little bit more sense with the NASA offices and the Johnson Space Center there. And then there are also ways you can filter by which record group and which government agency created that record. 255 is NASA, so it's no surprise that is one that has quite a bit of materials. But there also are Patent and Trademark Office, National Park Service, the SEC, that might be coming up for a different reason, naval personnel, State Department records, even Universal Newsreels, things from the Clinton Library. All these different types of materials are in the catalog. I'm going to pick just this star chart, which is hard to say. And here is a star chart from Apollo 11. The sun, the moon, Mars. Not 100% sure what's going in this star chart, to be frank, but it's definitely an interesting visual. If you want to include it, there's some contextual information there. If you wanted to find out more about it, maybe get a sense of what this material is, you can email the Fort Worth office, which has it. And again, just like before, this tells you that this star chart is part of a series of early Apollo surface experiments package. So if I wanted to go back up and see what's out there. This is probably be a little bit smaller than the patent record, which was 100,000 cubic feet. This is 2 linear feet of material, so several thousand pages. And there are some background information here. There might be even more within this collection. And you can see there's a couple of photographs, star charts, and other materials all within that one particular collection. To really kind of keep track of things, all these documents come up with a catalog number, the National Archives identifier number here. There's local information if you want to be able to contact that office and find out where it is as well. But if you keep this catalog number and that National Archives identifier number, which is like a 6-digit number, you should be pretty good. So that's a little short look into the catalog. Some other resources I want to share, and this is from the main archives.gov research portal page. We have the catalog here. There are these things called the record group, the presidential library, and the donated collections explorer. So the way materials are organized within the archives is initially by record group, which is what part of the federal government created or received those materials. And this kind of gives you a sense of, there are 200 million scans. It's only 1% of our total collection are in the catalog. And even you look at some of these and it kind of gives you, based on the size, how much that material is. But yeah, the district court record, which is a really big record group, only 0.5% has been scanned and digitized of those materials. If you click on any of these Secretary of Defense records, you can see that there are 19,000 scans online, but there's an estimate of 47 million pages within this record group. What's cool about this, if students are still kind of exploring a topic, not 100% sure what it is they're looking for, this does do a search within the catalog for textual records, for photographs, for electronic records, or video. If I click on photos, it'll bring up, in this case, this is a very large series, 269,000 photos from this combined military service file. And if I click on any of these, we're kind of back in the catalog like we saw before. We have this item. We can go back up to the series. And this was a series of 269,000 images. It's from the 1980s through 2007 is when it was compiled, and it actually has some images that date back, probably copies of lithographs and things to the 1780s through 2007. And this is, I think, was turned over to the archives as a digital records. So these are 280,000 digital images. And if you went into here, we clicked on search and typed in a search term, we'd be able to find things for it. Obviously, that's a very, very big record group, a very, very big collection. Some of these other ones might be more manageable, but if you want your students to kind of explore a particular type of topic, things like the EPA, frontier, a new frontier for the government to really kind of get involved in managing our environment during the Nixon administration. Again, photographs, textual records, even video and audio. Similarly, there are things out there for the presidential library system and for some donated collections as well that are part of our holdings. I'm sure there are many more materials on the presidential library pages that we just saw than are here, but these are also resources you can use. Okay. Another resource I want to share is this milestone documents page. And this is a resource that used to be called ourdocuments.gov. It lists 100 or so primary sources from the archives and some contextual information for all of these, things like the cotton gin, some background, the document, even a link out to docs teach if you want to be able to, continue learning about it. But if you wanted to even make it more manageable for your students, here's 100 documents that were part of this project from the early 2000s to put together the most important 100 documents from the archives. 2 more resources to share. There's this, all these will be on links on the presentation that you'll see on the Truman site. whenever there's a major anniversary or a particular Heritage Month or another federal holiday, the National Archives, I think Public Affairs Office makes these great special topics pages. If I click on any of these, like women's history, these will show you, news stories. They'll link out to blogs that the archives has published over the years, research links, videos from our holdings, but also of programs and discussions that were held at the archives, exhibits that have been created over the years, Prologue, which was the National Archives magazine, material from the libraries, educational resources, including some Docs Teach stuff, even some Flickr sets. So these special topics pages are super helpful to get both primary sources, secondary sources, videos, all these different things that your students might be able to include with their materials. One more thing I wanted to share. If you are, I put the wrong link there. If you are looking at a frontier from the early time period, the time of the founding fathers, the National Archives, National Historic Publications and Records Commission, the grant-making arm of the archives, has supported the Founders Project, the Founders Online Project. So there are letters here. They, between 7 major shapers of the U.S. You can actually, literally pick an author, George Washington, pick a recipient, Alexander Hamilton, and see all the letters back and forth between them, the two of them. You could pick, recipient John Adams, author Abigail Adams, and see all the letters between John and Abigail. Even if you search for, I know it's in here, the "Remember the Ladies" quote. I should have looked for this before. Yeah, this might be a July 16th. You get a transcript. Maybe it's not that. You get a transcript of that particular file, a citation of it. It even tells you how these particular things connect to each other. The last thing I want to share is the History Hub, which is a National Archives project. If you have a question, and your students will definitely be having research questions, and they want to pose a question to National Archives staff, but also this is a community of interested people, historians, citizen archivists, people from other institutions. You want to pose a question, put it out there, and someone will get back to you and kind of point you in the right direction for things that are in our holdings and maybe other places as well. And this is a project the archives has had for just the past few years. So there's tons of resources out there. Between Docs Teach, the special topics pages, the National Archives catalog, and the History Hub. As Josh and others have stated as well, we are all here to help support History Day teachers and students as well. So feel free to reach out to us. We're here to support you and your students in this whole research journey. I know we're a couple of minutes over. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I want to thank you, everybody, for your kind attention for the past hour or so. I do want to thank Sheila and Craig and Richard and Josh for their presentations. These will be posted. This entire presentation will be posted online on the Truman Library site. I'll drop that in the chat again, in addition to all the different materials that we have shared today. But if anybody has any questions, we will stay on for a couple of minutes and we'll handle them at this time as well. If not, thank you again so much for attending, and I wish you and your students good luck this year for National History Day. Well, I see people heading out. Thanks again so much. I think we'll end the meeting here. So thank you again. Take care.